Worst parts of great games. Final Fantasy III. And to be clear, I do mean the third Final Fantasy, not Final Fantasy VI. Some naming shenanigans in the 90s have led to this being an issue even today among some fans. Final Fantasy III was the last of the classic Final Fantasies to ever come westward, and until somewhat recently, it wasn't even available in the West in anything resembling its original form. Which is unfortunate, because Final Fantasy III is the game that solidified what Final Fantasy would be going forward, bringing back the traditional leveling system that had been disregarded in Final Fantasy II, and thankfully removing the awkward dialogue system from Final Fantasy II, both of which did much to improve and streamline the experience of Final Fantasy. And that's not to say that this game didn't try anything new, because it added a class system, which allowed you to make any member of your party any class you wanted, at least once you'd attained the classes, of course. And this gave you a great deal of control over your party, and in theory, allowed you to play the game however you wanted. However, in practice, it didn't actually work out that way. As while the class system was a great idea with a lot of potential, Final Fantasy III does some unfortunate things with it. Firstly, there are the various times throughout the game where you are forced to use particular classes. And if you didn't know that in advance and hadn't been using these classes, they're going to be very weak, so you'll have to spend time grinding. And it's also possible that you don't have any gear for these particular classes, again leading to grinding, and kind of artificially lengthening the game. The second problem with the class system is that you don't have a way to hybridize the classes as you do in later Final Fantasy games. So each of your 4 characters will be able to do one thing. So early on, if you want to have backup healers or characters that can fill more than one role, you're out of luck. And you might think, well, what about Red Mage? They can do white and black magic and kind of attack, but that's the problem. They can kind of do all those things, but not very well. They can heal, but not enough to matter. They can attack with swords or magic, but not enough to actually kill anything. So it's basically like you're just not having a party member if you choose Red Mage. And yes, later in the game you get classes that can fill more than one role, but by the time you get them, they don't do these roles well enough to justify using them. At least, not without a huge amount of grinding. And finally, and this is somewhat related to the last point, no matter how powerful you become in a class, it does not affect the next class you choose to have a character become. This is even true when a new class you acquire is clearly meant to be an upgrade to an older class. For example, you'll start out with a character in the Warrior class, your basic tank early on. Before too long, you'll find the Knight class. But unfortunately, unless you've done virtually no grinding, which is almost impossible, the Knight class is going to feel far weaker than the Warrior class did. And only if enough time is spent in the Knight class will it start to outshine the Warrior class. It is for these reasons that I think the class system is in fact the worst part of Final Fantasy III. Not necessarily for being a class system, but more for how it is implemented and treated within the game. And it's clear I'm not alone in thinking this, as the next time the class system would show up in Final Fantasy V, all of the issues that were present in the Final Fantasy III version have been resolved. And most of the time when a class system will show up in a Square Enix game, it will much more resemble Final Fantasy V than Final Fantasy III. Because the class system was a great idea, but it was the worst part of a great game. Please do subscribe, comment, like, and tell your friends.